You already know how this goes. You meet someone, you like her, you do everything right. You're kind, you're considerate, you're there when she needs someone to talk to. You listen, you remember the things she tells you. You show up. You are, by every reasonable measure, a genuinely good man who treats her well. And then one day she tells you she likes someone else. Someone who, from where you're standing, doesn't seem to deserve her half as much as you do. Someone who says less, gives less, tries less. Someone who, frankly, doesn't seem to care as much as you care. And the worst part? The part that stays with you, the part that you turn over in your mind for longer than you'd like to admit, is that she seems genuinely drawn to him in a way she never was to you. There's a quality to how she talks about him, how she responds to him, that was never there with you despite everything you offered. You've probably been told, by well-meaning people, by culture, by every romantic movie ever made, that this happens because women don't actually want good men, that they're drawn to the wrong kind of guy, that the nice guy always finishes last. That is not what is happening. What is actually happening is something far more specific and far more fixable, and understanding it is going to change the way you move through every interaction you have from this point forward. Here is the truth. It is not your kindness that is costing you. It is not your consideration, your thoughtfulness, your genuine care for the people in your life. None of those things are problems. They are real strengths, and the right person will recognize them as exactly that. What is costing you is one specific thing, one trait, the trait that gets mislabeled as a bad boy quality, the trait that gets associated with men who seem not to care, that you have been systematically avoiding because you were taught, somewhere along the way, that avoiding it was what a good man does. That trait is emotional courage, the willingness to say what you actually mean, to express genuine interest without hedging it into ambiguity, to be clear about what you want without dressing it up in so much niceness that the message disappears entirely. To risk being wrong, risk being rejected, risk the discomfort of someone knowing exactly how you feel, because the alternative, the endless, careful management of impression, the performance of indifference you don't feel, the friendship you offer when what you actually want is something more, costs you far more than the rejection ever would. That is what we're going to talk about, completely, honestly, without any of the pickup artist nonsense that usually surrounds this topic. Let's go. First, let's be precise about what we're talking about, because emotional courage is one of those phrases that gets used loosely enough to mean almost anything, and that looseness doesn't serve you. Emotional courage is not aggression. It is not arrogance. It is not the performance of not caring that some men mistake for confidence. It is not treating people dismissively, playing games, or engineering situations to make yourself seem less interested than you are. All of that is fear wearing a costume. It is the behavior of a man who is just as afraid of rejection as the nice guy. He's just found a more socially acceptable way to protect himself from it. Real emotional courage is much simpler and much harder than any of that. It is the willingness to let another person know, clearly and without excessive qualification, what you actually think and feel and want, and to remain comfortable in yourself regardless of how that is received. Think about the men you've encountered who seem to have this quality, the ones who communicate their interests directly without making it desperate, who disagree with you without making it a confrontation, who hold their position under pressure without rigidity, who can say, "I like you, and I'd like to take you to dinner," without surrounding that sentence with so much careful ambiguity that the woman on the receiving end isn't sure if she just received an invitation or a hypothetical. There is something in the presence of those men that is immediately unmistakably different from the careful, approval-seeking, conflict-avoiding niceness that most men have been trained into. And that something is not manufactured. It cannot be faked effectively. It is the quality of a man who has made a fundamental decision that his own honest expression is worth more than any particular person's approval of it. That decision and the behavior it produces is what creates genuine attraction, not the tattoos or the indifference or any of the other surface features that get associated with the bad boy archetype. The actual thing underneath all of those surface features is this: a man who says what he means and means what he says and is not destroyed by the possibility that you might not like it. Here is the psychology of how good men end up in this pattern. And I want to be clear that it is a pattern, not a character flaw, not a permanent condition, not something wrong with you at a fundamental level. At some point in your development, often earlier than you can consciously track, you learned that expressing what you actually felt produced negative consequences. Maybe directness in your environment was received as aggression. Maybe showing genuine interest made you vulnerable to rejection or mockery. Maybe you watched the people around you manage relationships through careful performance rather than honest communication, and you absorbed that as the model. And so, you developed a strategy, an extremely effective short-term strategy that has been costing you long-term. The strategy is this: make yourself safe by making yourself agreeable. Avoid expressing anything that might create friction. Offer friendship as a way of staying close to someone you want without risking the rejection that a direct expression of interest might produce. Manage your presentation so carefully that no one ever has enough information to reject you. Because if nobody knows what you actually want, nobody can tell you no. This strategy feels safe. It is not safe. It is the most expensive strategy available to you in terms of what it costs you over time. Here is what it actually produces. It produces relationships in which your genuine self, the man who has real preferences, real desires, real opinions, real feelings, is not present. What is present is a carefully managed version of you that has been optimized for acceptability. And acceptability, while comfortable, does not create attraction. Attraction requires polarity. It requires the experience of encountering someone who is genuinely, specifically, unmistakably themselves. Someone whose presence has edges and direction and honest expression. You cannot be attracted to a mirror. You cannot be drawn to someone who shapes himself entirely around your preferences, because there is nobody there to be drawn to. The nice guy, in his desperate attempt to avoid rejection, makes himself invisible, and you cannot want someone you cannot see. Let's make this concrete, because abstract principles don't change behavior. Specific, real, recognizable scenarios do. Scenario 1. You've been talking to a woman for several weeks. You enjoy her company. You find her genuinely attractive. You want to ask her out. The nice guy version. You continue the conversation indefinitely, hoping that at some point the situation will naturally resolve into a date without you having to explicitly say anything that could be explicitly refused. You drop hints. You make yourself available. You wait. The emotionally courageous version. You say clearly and without extensive hedging that you'd like to take her to dinner. You don't dress it up as hanging out or maybe sometime we should, or any other formulation designed to give you plausible deniability if she's not interested. You say what you mean, and then, this is the crucial part, you are genuinely okay with either answer. Not performing okayness, actually okay, because you've made a decision that your honest expression matters more than any particular outcome. That quality, the genuine comfort with either response, is what separates emotional courage from desperation. Desperation asks and needs a specific answer. Courage asks and genuinely respects both available answers. Scenario 2. You're in a conversation and she says something you disagree with. Maybe it's an opinion, a judgment, a way of seeing something that doesn't match how you see it. The nice guy version, you agree, or you qualify your disagreement so heavily that it functionally disappears. Because disagreement feels like conflict, and conflict feels like rejection, and rejection feels like the loss of whatever tenuous connection you've been carefully building. The emotionally courageous version, you name it, simply, directly, without making it bigger than it is. Hey, when you do that, it bothers me. I'd rather you didn't. Not an ultimatum, not a production, just the honest communication of a man who respects himself enough to say what is true for him and trusts the relationship to be strong enough to hold it. This is, paradoxically, one of the most immediately attractive things a man can do in a developing relationship, because it communicates something that no amount of agreeableness can communicate, that you have a self, a real, distinct, boundaried self with real preferences and real limits. And a man with a real self is the only kind of man it is possible to genuinely respect. Let's talk about what is actually underneath the avoidance, because it is not at its root about strategy. It is about fear, and the fear deserves to be named honestly rather than worked around. The fear is rejection. Specifically, the particular form of rejection that feels like it confirms a deeper fear. The fear that if you express what you genuinely want, the answer will be no. And that no will mean something more than just not interested in dinner. It will mean not worthy, not enough. The fear that your honest expression will be evaluated and found lacking, and that the finding will say something true about your fundamental value as a person. This fear is not irrational. It developed in real circumstances, from real experiences, and it is remarkably common, so common that most of the behavioral patterns described in this script are, at their root, different forms of managing it. But here is what you need to understand about rejection, clearly and without softening. Rejection is not the worst outcome. The worst outcome is never finding out. The worst outcome is years of careful management that produces nothing, no connection, no relationship, no experience of being genuinely known and chosen, because you were so committed to avoiding rejection that you made yourself impossible to select. Every rejection is information. It tells you immediately and clearly that this particular person and this particular dynamic is not the right fit. That information is worth having. It saves you time. It saves you the slow drain of pursuing something through indirection that was never going to develop the way you hoped. And here is something that most men in this pattern don't fully believe until they experience it. Expressing your genuine interest clearly and being told no by someone who is simply not interested in that way, while uncomfortable in the moment, is nowhere near as painful as you've been anticipating. The anticipatory fear of rejection is almost always worse than the rejection itself, because the rejection is over quickly. The avoidance is endless. Emotional courage is not a switch you flip. It is a capacity you build. And it builds the same way every other capacity builds, through practice, through the accumulation of small acts of honest expression that gradually teach your nervous system that the thing it has been afraid of is survivable. Start small, not with the highest stakes interaction in your life, not with the person you're most afraid of losing access to, not with the scenario where the fear is loudest. Start somewhere where the stakes are low enough that you can actually access the courage without it being immediately overwhelmed by the fear. Disagree with someone about something small. Express a genuine preference instead of deferring to what you think the other person wants. Tell someone directly that you enjoyed their company rather than communicating it indirectly through availability. These small acts are not small. They are the building blocks of a different way of moving through the world. And notice what happens when you do them. Notice that the conversation usually continues, that the relationship usually survives, that the person on the receiving end of your honest expression usually responds not with the devastating rejection you anticipated, but with something closer to respect. The specific quality of attention that arises when you encounter someone who is genuinely present rather than carefully managed. Over time, not immediately, but genuinely over time, something changes, not just in how you behave, but in how you feel about yourself. The man who says what he means, who expresses what he wants, who holds his own opinions and limits with quiet self-respect, is a man who likes himself, who trusts himself, whose self-esteem is not dependent on any particular person's approval because it comes from something more reliable than approval. It comes from the consistent experience of being genuinely, honestly himself and finding that he survives it. That man is not a bad boy. He is not performing indifference or manufacturing aloofness or playing any of the games that pickup culture recommends. He is simply a man who decided that his honest self is worth expressing. And that decision, that single, fundamental, life-changing decision, is the most attractive thing available to you. Not because it is designed to attract, because it is real. And real is the rarest thing there is. You came into this feeling like the problem was your kindness, like the solution was to become less good, less caring, less yourself. That was never the answer. The answer is simpler and harder than that. It is to take the kindness and the care and the genuine investment you already have, all of which are real strengths, and add to them the one thing that has been missing: the willingness to be known. To say what you mean, to want what you want without apology, to express genuine interest without dressing it up in so much qualification that it disappears, to disagree when you disagree, to hold your ground when you hold your ground, to risk the discomfort of being clearly, honestly, specifically yourself, because the alternative, the endless careful management of how you appear, produces nothing worth having. The bad boy is not attractive because he is bad. He is attractive because he is present, because he takes up his own space without apology, because he communicates without hiding, because encountering him, you know exactly who you are dealing with. And that clarity, in a world full of careful, managed, approval-seeking performance, is remarkable. You can have that, not by becoming someone you're not, by becoming more completely who you already are. That is the whole thing. That is all of it. If this gave you something, if something in it finally named what you've been sensing without being able to say, share it with a man who needs to hear it. Someone who has been giving everything and hiding himself. Like it if it landed. Subscribe because there is more here, and it will find you when you're ready. Stop hiding what you feel. Say what you mean. The right person will not run from it. They've been waiting for it.